G'day expats and welcome to another episode of Expat Chat, episode 150. We finally cracked it. Finally cracked it. I don't know
Oh
what
yeah.
the cricket analogy of a 150 is. I know there's a century, but I'm not sure 150 counts for anything. But hey, I'm
Uh,
pretty happy with that. So it's got some weight behind that. 150 episodes, 7 seasons of these poor people listening to us right now put up with our
oh
dulcet
yeah.
tones. So thank you for everyone
Oh
for your
yeah.
patience of listening to 150 episodes. My name is Brett Evans and I'm the Managing Director for the Europe, Middle East and Africa region. And I'm joined by my mate and colleague, James Ridley, who's the Managing Director for the APAC region. G'day, James.
Gosh, what a warm welcome. And I mean, 150. God, it's got some Worcester behind it, doesn't it?
Yeah,
God.
yeah, no,
Uh,
I think it's cool. It's got a nice sound to it, doesn't it?
we need to break down how many minutes we have been boring people for.
My commiserations and salutations to all folks out there who've put up with our dribble.
That's absolutely all right. Thank you for tuning in for another episode. Today we're going to do a bit of Q&A, a bit of Q&A that's come out of our Facebook group. And if you're not in the Facebook group, jump in there, Australian Expat Financial Forum, some great things from different Australians all around the world, solving each other's problems, to be honest. It's great to see. But hey, before we get into it today, just a little disclaimer. The information discussed in this podcast is general in nature. It should not be taken or construed as personal financial advice or personal advice. It's here for entertainment purposes only, to keep the compliance officers of the world happy. If you do need advice, please feel free to reach out so we can customize and personalize that advice for you. Now, let's jump into a bit of Q&A for today.
Both feet, let's go, mate.
All right, first question, we've got one, and I do apologize if I pronounce any of these names wrong, from Sukama, seeking advice. How would an Australian citizen, now back in Australia, owning assets in multiple countries, go about making a will that would be legally binding and recognised in Australia? Any advice from those in a similar situation or from the vast wealth of knowledge in this community would be highly appreciated. As a quick nod there to the Expat Facebook group there.
Yep.
Vast knowledge indeed. It's a really good question, Sukama. Multiple assets all around the world. How do we do a will that can obviously take on all of them?
Yeah, look, I mean, first case, there's another episode, which was last week, that she can go back and listen to.
That's
So
right.
a bit of a nod
Yeah.
there. But for that whole, what's that saying? TLDR, too long didn't read. The answer
Too long didn't
is,
read, yeah.
yeah, and the old column.
Yep.
The answer to the question is you should have a will in the
Mm.
country of every country you hold assets in. Pure and simple.
Yep.
The reason being is the Australian courts are different to Dubai courts, which is different to Hong Kong courts, which is different to UK courts, which is different to US courts. So if you want rock solid, roll gold cover and protection, get a will
Mm.
in every country you hold an asset in.
Yep, absolutely. There's no such thing as a world will.
No.
I don't think there's firms online which profess to sell them and do them, but a world will doesn't exist. It's multiple wills usually, all bundled. But yes, that's how you would look after those different assets all around the world that you own there, Sukama. So that's a good question. Another one here from Laura. My husband and I are Australian citizens currently living in Canada. We both have super funds in Australia. What is the best way of maximising these? Should we contribute from Canada? Can we move these funds into property? Thanks in advance. Good question. So I'll take this one. Brett, you jump in as well. I mean, super is usually the longest investment we have in our life because it's usually started when we first work. So you can contribute to it when you are living abroad. Canada is very different to a country like the US and the IRS. So it does pay to look at contributing if it makes sense. There can be reasons as to whether it makes sense. Maybe you're trying to offset some income back in Australia to reduce your taxes that you're paying to the ATO, or maybe you're making after-tax contributions, non-concessionals, obviously staying within your defined caps. But there's other opportunities to keep growing, say, your retirement assets back in Australia as well. The question there, which talks briefly to property, can we move these into property? I mean, the only way that you can usually do that would be through a self-managed super fund. However, a non-resident or an Australian expat shouldn't have a self-managed super fund. It's actually pretty much impossible if you're both members and you're both living overseas, because you'll not be able to maintain central management control, and you'll breach the active members test as well, and therefore the ATO will come after you for half the balance and get you to wind it up. So don't do that. But there are ways to maximize the super, contributing to it, paying it attention, making sure it's invested, I suppose, based on the time horizon until you touch it. Often when we look at the superannuation industry as a whole, we're left in these my default, my super, balanced options. We might not be able to tap into super maybe for another 15 years or 20 years. So why is it in a balanced option? Yes, it might be aligned to your investor profile, but I think a conversation needs to be had as to whether that's in your best interest, given you can't touch it for probably another 2.5 market cycles. So maybe it should be invested a little bit more aggressively. And again, that's something that we try and personalize for our clients.
Mate, spot on, spot on. The only thing I'll add was, and it's a conversation that's quite a common question, especially in countries where there is a local pension. Obviously in Canada's the RRSP.
That's right, yeah.
I always say to folks, if you're not working in Australia and you're not getting the superannuation guarantee of 12%, is it 12% now? Sorry, just refresh the brain. That's getting up there. So if you're not saving in your foreign jurisdiction at a rate of 12% through a pension, let's say, for example, in the UAE here with dues, it's 5.83%. So in that case, I would contribute the difference between 12 and 5.83% into my Australian super to make sure that I have money going in as if I was back in Australia at that rate. Obviously, add on to that cash to offset, taxable Australian income, positive rental cash flow, concessional, like you pointed out. At the end of the day, when you are grappling with this issue, we always talk about you want to accrue wealth in the country you intend to return to or retire to. If you have no intention of returning to Australia, then max out your RRSPs and all the local Canadian pension schemes. But if you do have an intention to return to Australia and you want to try and mitigate currency risk, legislative risk, and all these other risks that expats face, then it does make sense to contribute to super.
Absolutely. Yep. And I mean, I one thing that I really channel home with a lot of my clients is we're really lucky in Australia in terms of how our retirement assets are taxed, concessionally taxed, the 15%, then the long-term capital gains 10%, and then everything is tax-free once it's in that account-based pension mode, as well as the income that we draw from it. Like there's no other structure or retirement vehicle like that around the world. And trust me, we're the firm that know that, because obviously we've seen them all. So it's unique in that. I don't like the fact that we have caps, but obviously they've got to do something to restrict putting too much in there. Otherwise, they've got to find a way to tax. But expats are really lucky because there's other avenues that they can invest in where it is still tax-free or tax efficient. So we're fortunate in that regard.
Definitely, mate. And I think that's the biggest thing, isn't it? The answer is it's different for everyone. Whether you want liquidity, whether you want forced savings, whether you want not to have the ability to draw cash out of an ATM on a Friday night at the bar. Some people need that. Some people are very disciplined. So they might want liquidity or the ability to have liquidity, but also too, they know they're not going to touch it. So I think it's a whole overlay. It's a whole strategy, as you said, whether you do or you don't and how you put that money in. It might be a combination of Australian super, Canadian RSP and an investment account. So there's a couple of different answers there, but hopefully that gives her the answer in terms of just understanding of moving parts.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. And another question here from Sandra. For a tax non-resident or a non-resident for tax purposes, what are the implications for buying US shares direct?
Uncle Sam, IRS, 3 letters that should strike fear in everyone's heart.
Oh gosh, we do whinge about the IRS, but they are the worst taxation authority in the world. Estate planning issues, their taxes, they're pretty low bar for anything that's, I guess, held directly and not on custodial platforms or anything like that. So that's probably the issue. The threshold's quite low as well. I think it's $60,000.
60,000 US.
Yeah, so it might have actually changed a little bit in the last 12 months, but the threshold is very low for holding direct US shares in the event you pass away. And often when we hold an investment directly on a local US platform, if you passed away, like, do you have anything that's set up locally to govern what happens to that asset afterwards? So, i.e. a will, rather than doing something from afar through a platform maybe in Australia. So that's probably the major considerations, I would say.
Yeah, it all comes back to what they call US situs. It's Latin for situated in the US. So
Mm,
if you've got assets that are situated in the US greater than 60,000 US dollars, the IRS is going to want to take 40 up to 40% of that balance.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
obviously with the advent of technology and trading platforms, and it's amazing now you can sit on your phone on IBKR and buy all these things. But understanding the other side, the risk, which unfortunately is the side that we do see, because unfortunately clients do pass away. So we see the ramifications and the fallout from what that occurs. And yeah, you need to understand both sides.
Mm,
US markets, 50% of the world market, 75% of the MISC World Index. So it is a beast of a market. So it's hard
mm,
not to invest in the US. Almost
yeah.
impossible if you want to get returns. But there are better ways to do it through custodial platforms and those sort of things, as opposed to going direct, because it does provide a bit of protection.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We'll keep moving. Next question from James. Great name, that one. Superannuation question. Once you reach preservation age, is there still any tax on withdrawing your super if you're not an Australian tax resident at the time, even if there would have been no tax if you were a resident? So you know, I'll repeat that one. Once you reach your preservation age, is there still any tax on withdrawing your super if you're not an Australian tax resident? So they're a non-resident, they're living overseas and they're withdrawing their super. Is there any tax on it, or is it treated the same way as if you were living in Australia? Brett, over to you.
It depends where you're living is the honest answer.
Mm,
If
mm,
you're living in the United States, guess what? You draw down 200,000 from your Australian super account. That is $200,000 of assessable income that the IRS is going to charge you tax on. If you're
mm.
living in Dubai, zero tax. If you're living
Yeah.
in the UK or France, that'll be taxed.
Mm,
So it really depends on the other side. I mean, as far as the Australian framework is concerned, once you hit pension phase, guess what? You can do whatever you want with that money. I had one
mm,
client many years ago who drew down half his super balance and bought a boat, and he called the boat the super fund, and then went and sailed around the world for 10 years. So that you can do that. But in terms of the other side, and this is what we keep talking to folks and especially our clients about, because we like our clients more than the listeners because they pay us our bills. But we
mhm,
talk about you need to have two-dimensional advice, two-dimensional spatial awareness in terms of what happens on one side affecting the other. If you're not cognizant of that, then that's when people have these big tax bills. I mean, I remember talking to a couple of colleagues in the US, James, and probably remember this phone call. We're talking to an accountant there who this Australian expat thought they were doing the right thing by winding up an SMSF while they're living in the US, and drew out 600,000 Australian dollars. Thinking they've done the right thing. Guess what? Their assessable income for that financial year was 600,000 Australian dollars with the IRS. So
Yep.
yeah,
No, and no way. I remember that one. No way to undo it as well. Can't backdate it. Can't do anything there. They copped a hiding on the tax as well, due to how the US treated that transaction, distribution from a foreign guarantor trust, PFIC treatment as well, capital gains realized. Very severe. Very severe. So don't
exactly.
do that.
So I think, yeah, for folks out there on the Australian side, good as gold. Other side,
Yep.
it depends.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Good one there from James. Another question here, and I mean, this might be we'll probably make this our last question because there's a lot probably in it that we can unpack, to be honest. It's a simple question, but what are the biggest retirement planning risks for Australian expats?
To me, sort of coming back to the last question, it's jurisdiction, domicile.
Yep.
I think
Yep.
folks who want to retire in the south of France, they look at their super balance, and we're seeing this more and more now. Folks who've spent their working life in Australia build up a nice little nest egg, go, great, I'm going to spend 5 or 10 years in Aix-en-Provence or anyway.
Hmm.
Sounds
Hmm.
amazing. What they don't understand is that the French will tax them on that allocated pension income stream.
Hmm.
That's the big thing I think I see a lot of folks not understand. Depends on the income stream. If you are receiving an age pension from the government, then you're in Spain. The DTA, the double taxation agreement, does give you a carve out for that, but not
Hmm.
every country does. So you need to look at almost reverse engineer it backwards. You need to look at the country you're looking to retire to, or you are living in and looking at retiring in, and then see how that framework, the legislation works with your Australian assets, and do they commingle together? If they don't, then that's a risk. And we see a lot of people who don't realise it until after the fact. They draw down 100,000 Australian dollars a year, living in France, south of France, lovely
Mm.
weather on the Côte d'Azur. And guess what?
Mm.
Bingo. The French go, please give us 20, $30,000 in tax. And they go, well, this is tax free. I've already paid tax on that. The DTA is not written like that. The DTA is written that under pensions, it will absorb the same way that the French pensions are taxed, which is obviously taxed in retirement.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you talked about it so well before about two-dimensional advice. You can't have the same lens like you're retiring in Australia. You've got to account for the other side. I think we're seeing more and more expats obviously work their entire lives in Australia, build up their retirement assets like almost like they are retiring in Australia, but then probably in the last 5 years, maybe in work, the thought process changes. And it's like, oh, maybe we try and retire over in Italy, south of France, somewhere Europe, somewhere Southeast Asia for the first couple of years. And, what's that going to do in terms of the tax treatment, the change on your assets? If you do go full non-resident, and then how is that country going to tax you on those assets? Is it possible to be I suppose a dual tax resident, or are you just doing the dodgy border run where you're there for a couple of months using the visa system and then doing the border run to get another visa? So, it means you're moving around constantly. So I think there's a lot of factors that come into that, but I think the biggest risk is not probably delaying your decisions with that two-dimensional advice lens and thinking, how's it going to be taxed on the other side? Currency is a big factor there as well. Like, if we're going to retire in Australia, then yep, makes sense. A lot of our wealth needs to be built up in our home currency. If we're sending money back every couple of months, every quarter, every month, every week, whatever it might be, that's great. You're taking a terrific dollar cost averaging approach to managing your currency risk rather than building up all your assets in one country and then retiring in another country and then going, shit,
Yeah.
the currency's on
Whoops.
parity at the moment. So I've lost 20 to 25% of my wealth technically because of what the currency is doing at this point in time when I want to retire and I don't want to work anymore. So that's not an approach that you should take. It's something that you need to do over, I would say, a long period to manage it. Absolutely. Rather than just pulling the trigger. And usually you do need a bit of time. You need a good runway to be able to achieve a successful retirement, especially when we're factoring in another country and the potential tax risks around that. The Australian government definitely keeps us busy with all those changes. So
Goalpost moving, always. Yeah.
that's right. So what's another country going to do to that as well? So that's an important one, but there's a lot in that one. There's a lot in that one.
Look, I think the other thing too is, and this is more so for those who are expats looking at retirement as opposed to those Australian residents looking at retirement. But if you're an expat looking at retiring overseas, you spend all your expat life fighting to retain your non-residency status. When in actual fact, in retirement, you're actually maybe better off being an Australian tax resident, which really is kryptonite to an expat to hear that. They go, no, 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 but I'm a non-res. And the reason I say this is primarily when you retire, your two biggest assets are your principal place of residence and your super fund. If you are an Australian tax resident, your principal place of residence is tax-free and your super fund is tax-free. Spend 3 to 6 months dotting around the world, 3 to 6 months back in Australia, best of both worlds, but your domicile and your jurisdictional from a tax point of view is Australia. So therefore, zero capital gains tax on your PPR, zero income tax and capital gains tax on your super fund. So just for the expats out there who are manifesting and all these big words that I can't spell about retirement overseas, just take that in the back of your mind that it may not actually be a bad thing to be treated as a tax resident of Australia.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're right. They get access to Medicare. The private health insurance is definitely a factor. I think when I speak to clients that live overseas for their retirement right now, they're, milking the golden visas that you can have. One of their biggest costs is actually the health insurance every year. It can be 10 to 20,000 Aussie. In some countries, it's even USD. So that's a tough one. Whereas if they're traveling and they're not setting down for a long period, and a lot of time they might be using travel insurance. And if something serious does go on, then just come back to Australia. We've got a great health system. We've got Medicare. If you're paying for private health insurance, you can usually use that. You've served your waiting periods. So that's a really important factor as well.
I don't think it is. I think it is, but I think yeah, I think we're giving the folks the good answers. So if you haven't joined the Australian Expat Financial Forum, please do. This is where we're getting all these questions from. So it's a nice little community of 3,500 Aussie expats like us in there sharing ideas. And it's those sort of questions that you can't ask in a public forum, or you couldn't ask a friend or family member back in Australia because they would not understand. So it's a safe space, I guess you could say. So make sure you join that. Being the vain people that James and I are, we're a little bit disappointed that the reviews and the likes and the shares have sort of slowed down a bit. So guys, just take a second just to subscribe, give us a 5-star. Think of it like Uber. You'd always give them a rating, so make sure you give us a rating. And we'll see everyone on episode 151 on the next half century towards 200 episodes.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys, for tuning in for another episode. Thanks, Brett.
Thanks, guys. Take care.